Hi, I'm Heather Felton. I'm a second year intern with the Fairfax County Master Gardeners, and tonight I will be talking about harvesting cabbage. So the next slide, please. Cabbage is a cool weather crop, and it should be ready for harvest 60 to 80 days after transplanting, but that does depend on the variety. Some are ready sooner than others. So make sure to consult your seed packet, which will give you an idea of days to maturity. Or if you transplant it, if you plant it from a transplant, check out the little stick that comes with it, and you can have a better idea exactly when your cabbage will be ready to harvest. Next slide, please. So cabbage is ready to harvest when its head is firm and has reached an adequate size. And that's another thing you can learn from your seed packet or the information that comes with seedlings, because they can range from in size, different varieties from sort of like a softball size to as big as maybe a basketball. So it really depends on which variety you have. And so you know when to watch it to see if it's reached its full size. And also the leaves will start to crack. And in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit, I think, about the cracking and what causes that. So next slide. Oh, one more, and then I'll talk about the cracking. So yeah, to harvest cabbage, you go to the base of the plant. You can use the sharp knife or loppers. Sometimes it's kind of hard to cut through the base with just a knife, so loppers can work better. And you cut through the base of the cabbage. And a tip that I find really important is to harvest in the morning when the leaves are firm. If you harvest later in the day, you might have a little bit of wilting in the leaves, and they won't be as crisp. So it's always better to harvest in the morning. Next slide, please. For storing cabbages, for fresh, you can store it up to 2 months. Keep it whole and unrinsed. The unrinsed part is very important. And place it in a plastic bag in the refrigerator crispy. For freezing, if you're going to cook it, trim the outside leaves, cut it into wedges or shreds, depending on what you're going to use it for. Blanch it, cool it, and then package it and freeze it. And this will keep, you can have cabbage all year long if you use this freezing method. Okay, so this is where I talk about the head cracking and splitting. You can see in the picture that this cabbage is split up on the top. This is caused by excess water uptake when the cabbage is getting close to maturity. Some people wait for the head to crack, or some, you can try to get headed off by knowing when your variety should be mature. So if the head cracks and the cabbage isn't quite to maturity yet, you can root prune it or twist the stalk and break some of the roots, and this will reduce the water uptake. So you won't be getting that excess water that will lead it to crack even more. And you can also, if you're during periods of frequent rainfall and heavy dew, you can harvest a little bit prior to its full ripeness to keep it from splitting like this. And to also help with the water intake, plant it in a well-drained area, although I realize that can be hard in Virginia with our clay soil. But try, maybe in a raised bed or something, and mulch it to help it retain even moisture levels. And these are some resources if you want to know more about cabbage, growing it, harvesting, storing it. You can consult any of these websites.
Thank you very much, Heather. That was great. Joy, do we have any questions?
No, there are no questions right now in the chat box for Heather. Nothing on cabbage.
Heather, I have a question for you.
Sure.
So during your presentation, you had mentioned that when you store the cabbage in the refrigerator, it should be unrinsed. And I've heard that with other vegetable as well. Can you explain why that's the case?
I don't know the scientific reason for it, but with anything that you store, I grow sweet potatoes and we do this. with garlic. If the storing them unrinsed kind of protects the outer leaves. That's why I do it. I'm not sure if that's the actual reason. If anybody has any more comment on that.
That was helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Question also, I've never grown cabbage, but my question is, when you harvest cabbage, do you get the one head and that's it, or does you get more than one head off of one planting?
On some of them, if you cut at the base, or a little above the base and leave a few leaves at the bottom, you can get sort of little baby cabbages coming off of that. I'm not sure if that's with all varieties or just some, but you can, if you leave some of the leaves on, you can get some more baby cabbage.
Great, thanks.
Very interesting. All right, well, thank you, Heather. And now let's turn to Sylvia to tell us about harvesting peas.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Liu. I'm the third-year intern from Fairfax County Master Gardeners Association, and I'm going to talk to you about peas, harvesting peas specifically. So peas it's a pretty special plant. It's actually grown worldwide in a lot of home gardens. The most common type that we've seen in the US is the English or garden peas. They're also called the shelling peas because you don't eat the skin. Instead, you shell the pea and you eat the peas inside. The best time to plant peas is around St. Patrick's Day. That's when I plant mine, and I just checked them this morning and they're looking fantastic. And usually harvesting peas, you do it towards the end of May and the beginning to the middle of June. It's usually 60 to 70 days after you plant the peas. Next slide, please. So when you're harvesting your peas, you want to harvest your peas when they reach the full size. Usually they're slightly bigger than the dry seeds that you planted. And when the peas has reached that size, that's when it's time, to harvest them. So mature peas taste sweet, tender, they're thin-skinned, they're non-starchy. It's important when you're harvesting peas to remember the window to harvest is actually rather small. It's only 1 to 3 days. So if you see the peas reaching optimum size, then it's a good time, to harvest them within 1 to 3 days. Because if you leave them on the vine, they're going to become very starchy and they're just not going to taste very good. Next slide, please. So there are a couple of different types of peas that people usually plant. The garden peas and the English peas I talked about earlier, they're called shelling peas. Again, that's because you don't eat the skin. Instead, if you see this picture, you eat what's inside the skin. So you don't eat the entire pod, but you eat the peas inside the pod. The best way to preserve peas is that after picking them, you shell the peas immediately and cool them. Or you can cool the entire pea pod right away and then you shell them later. If you harvest your peas on a really warm day, then it's a good idea to shell them and then to dunk the peas in very cold water to chill and then to dry and refrigerate. Once the peas are chilled and cooled, their quality, they can hold their quality for about a week or a little over a week in the refrigerator. Next. So there are other type of peas that are pretty popular in home gardens, and one of them is snow peas. These are a little different than the garden peas that we talked about. And that's because you don't just eat what's inside the pod, you eat the entire pod with the seeds inside. The best time to harvest the pod is when they have reached full length, and depending on the variety, that's different. The full length for one variety might be different from another, so it's best to refer back to the seed packet to see how big the pod reach before you harvest them. You should, when you harvest them, you should see the peas in the pod visible, but just barely visible. So unlike the garden peas. So just like the garden peas, it's a good idea to cool the snow peas after picking. Also, depending on the variety, there might be strains along the edges of the pea pod. So if you're going to cook them, it's a good idea to remove the strings first. Next slide, please. There's also the sugar snap peas, which is very popular as well for home gardeners. When they mature, they almost look like garden peas. You can see the peas really plumping up in the pod. And just like the garden peas, it's good to harvest the sugar snap peas within 1 to 3 days of maturity to ensure that their taste remains sweet, juicy, and tender. Just like the other peas, it's a good idea to cool the sugar snap peas immediately after picking. And also, depending on variety, you might need to remove some of the strings along the edges of the pea pod before cooking. Next, please. So here's some of the sources that I reviewed to gather information about harvesting peas. You can check out any of them. And I think if you want to learn more about harvesting peas, they might be good reads.